Alicia, a 30-year-old financial expert from Seattle, stepped into her sister-in-law Martha's lakeside home amid pouring rain, her heart heavy with suspicion. Lucas, her husband of 4 years, placed a special jasmine tea in front of her with a cold gaze, while Martha smiled with a cryptic edge. The strange chemical scent wafting from the tea made Alicia's heart pound. Could this be the reason she nearly lost her unborn child once before? What secrets were hidden behind those familiar smiles, and would she escape the invisible trap this time? Alicia sat in Martha's living room, the light from the crystal chandelier casting a glow that highlighted the raindrops clinging to the windowpane, like silent tears mirroring her own. The jasmine tea Lucas had just placed before her emitted a strange scent, not the gentle fragrance of dried petals, but something sharp and cold, akin to the antiseptic she'd smelled in the hospital 2 years ago. That night, she had collapsed in wrenching pain, blood soaking the bedsheets, and the child she hadn't yet met slipped away forever. The doctors called it a natural accident. Lucas held her as he sobbed, and Martha brought white carnations to console her. But now, as the chemical odor from the tea stung her nostrils, that memory was no longer a vague sorrow, it sharpened into a piercing question stabbing at her heart. Was it all truly random? For years of marriage to Lucas had once painted a beautiful picture. He'd met her at a financial seminar in Seattle, his warm smile and tender gaze convincing her she'd found her safe harbor. Martha, Lucas's sister-in-law, welcomed her like a younger sibling, inviting her to lakeside family gatherings where laughter echoed over glasses of wine and the scent of burning wood from the fireplace. But that picture had slowly cracked. Unexplained stomach pains, sleepless nights, and dizzy spells began creeping in after meals at Martha's house. The first time, 3 years ago, she blamed the seafood at Lucas's birthday dinner, a tray of oysters Martha insisted she try. She woke up in the hospital with an empty stomach and Lucas's explanation, "You must have been allergic." The second time, a special strawberry juice Martha made for her caused her to faint on the couch, and once again, Lucas said, "Maybe you've been overworking." She'd believed him, believed Martha too. Why would they harm her, the one they called family? But everything shifted 3 months ago when she glimpsed a text on Lucas's phone, left forgotten on the kitchen counter. "She can't show up to that meeting, Martha. Up the dose." The message from Martha was brief but chilling, slicing through Alicia's chest like a blade. The meeting they referenced was her biggest career moment, a multi-million-dollar financial contract she'd won from a rival, the same company where Martha worked. She tried to dismiss her suspicions, telling herself it was a misunderstanding, but then she started noticing the little things, Lucas's evasive glances when she asked about his day, the hours he'd vanish under the guise of helping Martha fix the house, and the way Martha looked at her during gatherings, not with warmth, but with envy buried beneath a flawless facade. Now, sitting before the steaming tea, Alicia felt every nerve in her body taut, ready to snap. She recalled her most recent hospital stay, 3 months back, after drinking a lemonade Martha prepared at a family picnic. She collapsed on the grass, her ears ringing with the wind, and when she awoke in the ER, Lucas held her hand, whispering, "I told you to be careful with outdoor drinks." But that time, she'd overheard Martha murmur to him in the hospital corridor, "Next time, we need to be sure." That voice, cold and composed, now echoed in her mind like an unignorable warning. Then the most agonizing memory flooded back, the night she lost her baby. It was dinner at Martha's, where she drank an herbal tea to soothe the pregnancy that Martha had personally brewed. She'd thanked her sister-in-law for the thoughtfulness, unaware that hours later, she'd be on the bathroom floor, screaming in despair as blood flowed uncontrollably. Lucas had cried beside her, but his eyes then, looking back now, held not grief, but the panic of being found out. A cold gust from the window jolted Alicia, snapping her back to the present. She stared at the tea, her hands gripping the table's edge, to steady their trembling. If those past incidents were real, if Lucas and Martha were truly behind it all, from the minor pains to the greatest loss of her life, then this tea wasn't just a drink, it was a death sentence. But why? What had she done to make them hate her so much? Was it her career, the big contracts she'd secured, the praise from her boss that Martha never received? Or something deeper, a dark secret she'd never suspected? Tears threatened to spill, but she held them back, replaced by a smoldering ember of rage. She was no longer the naive wife swallowing her husband's lies, nor the docile sister-in-law bowing to Martha's vain care. She needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Alicia looked up at Lucas standing near the fireplace, the flames reflecting in his eyes as if concealing a profound secret. Martha sat across from her, her delicate hands twirling a silver spoon in her own tea, untouched. They were waiting for her to lift the tea to her lips, waiting for her to fall as she had so many times before. But this time, Alicia wasn't blind. She took a deep breath, the chemical scent from the tea like a final challenge. The child she'd lost, the nights of agony in the hospital, the dreams they'd stolen, all of it began with them, and she wouldn't let them win again. Her hand tightened around the phone in her pocket, her thumb brushing the record button. This wasn't just a family gathering, it was a battlefield, and Alicia was ready to fight for her life. Martha's living room, with its crackling fireplace and family photos lining the walls, had once felt warm and welcoming to Alicia, but now it seemed like a stage meticulously set to conceal the truth. She glanced at Lucas, the man she'd once loved passionately, now standing by the fireplace, the flames reflecting in his eyes as if burning away the promises of their past. Martha, with her shimmering blonde hair and flowing white silk dress, looked like an angel, but her gaze was icy, calculating, as if counting the seconds until Alicia lifted the tea to her lips. Then Alicia noticed something small yet heart-stopping. On the table, next to the tin of cookies Martha had just opened, lay a silver necklace, the gift Lucas had given her for their second anniversary, engraved with "Forever by your side." So why was it here, in Martha's possession, glinting like a cruel mockery? A pang of betrayal stabbed through her, mingling with her fear of the tea before her. They weren't just trying to harm her, they were dismantling everything she'd once held sacred. Alicia took a deep breath, struggling to stay calm, but the chemical scent from the tea jolted another memory, the night she lost her child. She remembered every detail, Martha standing in the kitchen, smiling as she handed her an herbal tea to soothe the pregnancy, Lucas sitting beside her, holding her hand and saying, "Drink it, you need to rest." Hours later, she'd screamed in agony, begging Lucas to save their baby, but he just stood there, motionless, his eyes hollow. Now, staring at the jasmine tea in front of her, Alicia realized it wasn't an accident, it was the beginning of a plot she'd been too naive to see. Tears welled up, but she bit her lip hard, refusing to let them see her break. They wanted her to drink, to collapse once more, but this time, she wouldn't let them win. She looked up, forcing a smile at Lucas. "You've gotten good at making tea," she said, her voice trembling but striving for normalcy. He nodded, a flicker of tension in his eyes, then glanced at Martha as if seeking confirmation. That's when Alicia noticed another detail: Martha wasn't drinking her own tea. The spoon twirled steadily in her hand, but her cup remained full, not a drop missing. Alicia's heart pounded, this was living proof of her suspicions. They didn't just want her to drink, they knew what was in the tea, and they were waiting for her to crumble. Then, a thought struck her, sharp as the lightning outside: what if she switched the cups? If Martha drank what they'd prepared for her, the truth would reveal itself. She reached for the tea, pretending to lift it to her lips, then deliberately let it slip from her hand onto the table. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she cried out, her voice breaking as if in tears, though the water streaming down her face came not from clumsiness, but from the eruption of rage and pain inside her. As Lucas and Martha startled and turned toward the spill, she swiftly swapped her cup with Martha's, her movements quick and precise, like a calculated dance. "I'm so clumsy, let me clean it up," she said, bending to grab a napkin, her hands shaking but her resolve unwavering. She stood and stepped back toward the window, her eyes never leaving them. Lucas frowned, but Martha, without a hint of suspicion, picked up the switched cup and took a small sip. Within seconds, her hands began to tremble, the cup slipped from her grasp and shattered on the floor, and Martha's scream pierced the air, sharp as the rain hammering the glass. "Lucas, what have you done?" Alicia stood there, tears rolling down her cheeks, but the faintest smirk tugged at her lips. She'd been right, and now the truth was exploding into the open. Martha clutched her throat, her hands trembling violently, her once proud face now pale, her eyes wide with horror as she stared at Lucas. He rushed to her, dropping to his knees beside her, his voice breaking. No, it wasn't supposed to be like this. You weren't supposed to drink that one." But his words were like wind swept away by the rain, powerless to change the truth unfolding before Alicia. The tea she'd deftly swapped wasn't just an experiment, it was the blade they'd intended to end her with, now turned back on its mastermind. Everything happened so fast, yet for Alicia, that moment stretched into eternity. Just minutes ago, when she'd pretended to spill her tea, her tears weren't entirely an act, they were an eruption of the pain of betrayal, of years of trust trampled mercilessly by Lucas and Martha. She'd screamed, "How could you do this to me?" A question that needed no answer but was enough to startle them, enough to let her switch the cups in the split-second chaos. Her hands had trembled as she made the move, but her mind was startlingly clear. The phone in her pocket had been recording since she entered the living room, and now every panicked word from Martha, every ragged breath from Lucas, was captured, like bricks building the wall of truth she'd used to bury them. Alicia stepped back, leaning against the icy window frame, her breathing sinking with the steady patter of rain outside. She watched Martha collapse to the floor, her hands clawing for support, her white silk dress crumpling like the perfect facade she'd once worn. Lucas knelt beside her, hands clutching his head, muttering, "That wasn't your cup, Martha, it was supposed to be hers." His voice cracked, but it wasn't remorse, it was the desperation of someone watching a meticulously crafted plan crumble in an instant. A chill ran down Alicia's spine as she heard hers, the wife he'd vowed to love forever, now just a target in their twisted game. But then, another feeling rose within her, triumph laced with pain. They'd underestimated her, and now that very arrogance would be the rope binding them. She recalled the moment she decided to switch the cups, not a spur-of-the-moment act, but the culmination of months of silent suspicion. The idea had struck when she noticed Martha wasn't drinking her own tea, when Lucas's eyes flickered with tension as she pretended to lift her cup to her lips. She'd played a dangerous game, but there was no turning back. When Martha took that first sip, Alicia had held her breath, part of her hoping she was wrong, part of her praying the truth would come to light. And then, when Martha screamed, when Lucas lunged forward in panic, she knew she'd won, not out of joy, but out of survival. Tears streamed down her cheeks, hot against the room's chill, but she didn't falter. She stood tall, hands gripping her phone, recording every second of this nightmare like a declaration. She was no longer prey. Martha slumped fully to the floor, her breathing labored, her bloodshot eyes glaring at Alicia with a mix of hatred and fear. You switched them," she rasped, her voice faint but still sharp as a blade. Alicia stepped forward, slowly, the click of her heels on the floor like a countdown to fate. "Yes," she said, her voice cold but trembling with surging emotion. "I switched them because I knew what you wanted. I just didn't realize how ruthless you could be." Lucas looked up, his face ashen, his lips moving but no words coming out. He wanted to explain, but Alicia's gaze, no longer that of a loving wife but of a survivor, silenced him. She leaned down, locking eyes with Martha. "You took my child, stole the years I spent trusting you. So how does it feel now, tasting what you meant for me?" The rain gradually subsided, leaving behind a suffocating silence in Martha's living room, where Alicia stood like an unyielding shadow, her piercing gaze fixed on Martha writhing on the floor. Martha's feeble groans mingled with her ragged breaths, but it was the panic in her eyes, now stripped of all arrogance, that spoke volumes. Lucas knelt beside her, his trembling hands cradling her, yet his eyes darted to Alicia, filled with a mix of terror and pleading. "Alicia, it's not what you think," he stammered, his voice breaking like a man teetering on the edge of an abyss. But his words couldn't erase what had just unfolded. The tea Alicia had cleverly swapped had brought Martha down, and in her agony, the dark truth Alicia had long suspected began to surface, each jagged fragment cutting into her heart like a blade. Alicia stepped forward, the sharp click of her heels on the wooden floor echoing like a drumbeat of fate, each stride an unspoken accusation. She stopped before Martha, looking down at the woman who'd once pretended to be a sister, now curled up in her crumpled white silk dress. "Tell me," Alicia whispered, her voice icy yet trembling with the fury blazing inside her. "Tell me everything, or I'll let you die from the very thing you meant to kill me with." Martha coughed violently, her hands clawing at the floor, then looked up, her bloodshot eyes meeting Alicia's with a mix of hatred and fear. "Fine," she rasped, her voice weak but sharp as a knife. "We wanted you gone, not just from the project, but from this life. You took everything from me, my career, my reputation, even Lucas's love. The confession struck like a blow, making Alicia stagger, but she held her ground, her fists clenched to keep the tears at bay. Lucas shot up, lunging toward Alicia, but she thrust out a hand to stop him, her gaze a blazing fire that incinerated every lie he'd ever built. Love, she snarled, her voice cracking with pain. You call poisoning me, taking my child, love? He stumbled back, his face ashen, his lips moving soundlessly. Martha let out a bitter, wheezing laugh, despite her worsening breaths. That's right, she said, her voice distorted by pain. That baby, we did it on purpose. I put it in the tea to make you lose it. Lucas said if you had a kid, he'd never leave you. I couldn't stand it. The admission exploded like a bomb in Alicia's chest, shredding any lingering hope that her loss had been an accident. She sank to her knees, hitting the floor as tears streamed uncontrollably, but within that pain, a fierce, unstoppable rage surged to life. She looked up, locking eyes with Lucas, the man she'd once loved with all her heart, now a stranger with a face twisted in fear. Is she telling the truth? She asked, her voice quivering but sharp as a blade. Lucas bowed his head, hands covering his face, then gave a faint nod, a small gesture that shattered Alicia's heart one final time. I didn't want you to die, he whispered, his voice faltering. It's just. Martha said if you lost the project, if you weakened, I could stay with her. But then it went too far. Alicia let out a dry, hollow laugh that rang through the silent room, like the rain outside now reduced to lonely drops. Too far? She echoed, standing up, her red-rimmed eyes blazing with resolve. You killed my child, poisoned me for months, and now tried to kill me over $1 million contract and your sick version of love. Suddenly, Martha struggled to rise, one hand gripping the table's edge, her voice a ragged hiss of hatred, not just the project. His mother loved you more than me. She left everything to you in her will, called you her real daughter. I couldn't let you have it all. The revelation hit like lightning, tearing through the darkness of Alicia's mind. She recalled the times Lucas's mother had hugged her, whispering that she was her pride. That jealousy, deeper than workplace rivalry or romantic betrayal, had turned Martha into a remorseless monster. Alicia stepped back, her breath hitching, her heart aching as she realized this plot wasn't just Lucas and Martha's betrayal, it was a family tragedy she'd never foreseen. She pulled the phone from her pocket, her trembling fingers pressing stop on the recording. Every word of Martha's confession, every gasp from Lucas, was captured, an undeniable verdict. You're done, she said, her voice cold but resonating with strength. The rain outside Martha's house had stopped completely, leaving a frigid stillness that permeated the living room, where Alicia stood watching Martha curled up on the floor and Lucas hunched over with trembling hands cradling his head. Martha's confessions, about deliberately taking her child, her jealousy over Lucas's mother's affection, and their plot to kill her over $1 million project, echoed in Alicia's mind like a haunting melody, both agonizing and galvanizing her to act. She gripped the phone tightly, the recording she'd just stopped a final flame she needed to incinerate those who'd betrayed her. Without hesitation, she dialed 911, her voice calm but razor-sharp. I need an ambulance and police at 742 Lakeview Drive. My sister-in-law's been poisoned, and I have proof it's attempted murder. When the operator pressed for details, she only said, "Come quickly, I'll explain everything." She hung up, her gaze unwavering on Lucas and Martha, two people who were no longer family, but criminals awaiting judgment. The distant wail of ambulance sirens pierced the gloomy afternoon silence, and minutes later, the door burst open. Paramedics rushed in, hoisting Martha onto a stretcher, her face ashen, her glazed eyes pleading with Alicia, though no words escaped her trembling lips. Police followed, their stern gazes sweeping the room. Alicia stepped forward, handing her phone to the lead officer, a tall man with salt and pepper hair. Listen to this, she said, her voice quaking with surging emotion. They've been poisoning me for months, killed my baby, and tried to kill me again today. The officer pressed play, and Martha's voice crackled through, faint but unmistakable. We wanted her gone. That baby, we did it on purpose. Lucas sobbed, lunging to stop it, but two other officers pinned him down, handcuffs clicking into place with a cold metallic snap. Alicia stepped back, leaning against the wall, her breath ragged as memories of months of poisoning flooded back like a horror reel. She recalled every glass of water, every meal at Martha's, the fake smiles, the hollow concern, and the nights she'd collapsed in pain, believing it was just bad luck. But now, the truth was laid bare, and the evidence wasn't just in the recording. An officer searching Lucas's coat by the door pulled out a small glass vial with a faded chemical label. "What's this?" he demanded, voice firm. Lucas hung his head, silent, but Martha, from the stretcher, rasped, "It's what we used to weaken her." That final confession was like a last dagger, but for Alicia, it was the bullet that finished their scheme. At the hospital, the harsh white lights illuminated the corridor where Alicia sat waiting, arms wrapped around herself to quell the shivers of pain and rage. A doctor emerged from the ER, his face grave. "We found a neurotoxin in Martha's blood," he said, looking at Alicia. "If she'd drunk more, or if you'd drunk that cup, we'd be dealing with a corpse." Alicia nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of release. She played the recording for the doctor, and within hours, police returned with a notebook from Lucas's office, detailed logs of every attempt to poison her, from small doses causing stomach pain to the stronger ones that triggered her miscarriage. "They'd been planning this for a long time," an officer said, his voice low. "This isn't just a plot, it's organized crime." The trial took place 3 months later in a stifling Seattle courtroom. Alicia sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly, listening to the prosecutor's every accusation. The recording, the vial, the notebook, and text messages between Lucas and Martha, "Up the dose, she can't show up to that meeting," formed a perfect mosaic of a horrifying picture. Lucas kept his head down throughout, unable to meet her eyes, while Martha, partially recovered, sat with a vacant stare, like a broken doll. When the prosecutor called Alicia, she stood, her voice trembling but resolute. "They took my child, my trust, and nearly my life. I just want justice." Lucas's sobs echoed from the defendant's bench, but Alicia didn't look back. She had no room left for pity. The judge's gavel fell, his voice resounding, "Lucas Bennett and Martha Anderson are sentenced to life in prison for attempted murder and organized conspiracy." Alicia exhaled, feeling a weight lift from her chest. As she left the courtroom, rare Seattle sunlight streamed through the window, warming her face. She'd lost so much, but now she'd reclaimed herself, not through forgiveness, but through the strength of the truth and justice she'd fought for with her own hands. The rare Seattle sunlight filtered through lush green trees, casting dappled patterns on the lake near Martha's house a year after the trial ended. Alicia stood silently, her hands cradling a small wooden box containing the ashes of Lucas's mother, the woman who'd left her not just an inheritance, but a love she hadn't fully understood until the truth unraveled. The life sentences handed down to Lucas and Martha still echoed in her mind like a somber melody closing a chapter of pain, but today, she wasn't here to dwell on that hurt. She'd come to release those memories into the water, to let them drift away with the gentle breeze, and to start anew, not as a victim, but as a victor who'd turned her scars into unshakable strength. After the trial, Alicia returned to her job at the financial firm with a transformed resolve. The million-dollar project Lucas and Martha had tried to sabotage was now hers to lead, and she'd turned it into a resounding triumph, catapulting her name to the top of the industry. The meetings she'd once missed due to mysterious pains became stages for her to shine, her steady voice ringing out amid colleagues' admiring gazes. But that success wasn't just about numbers or contracts, it was a resounding rebuttal to those who'd nearly taken everything from her. She recalled the courtroom moment when Lucas's sobs filled the air and Martha's vacant eyes stared at her from the defendant's bench. Justice had been served, but for Alicia, the true victory was rising from the ashes they'd left behind, stronger than ever. One autumn afternoon, Alicia stepped onto the main stage at the Seattle Finance Conference, the spotlight highlighting the deep green dress she wore, a color of rebirth, of hope. Over 1,000 attendees sat below, but her tear-brimmed eyes weren't from nerves, they were for the story she was about to share. "I was once a trusting wife, a naive sister-in-law," she began, her voice trembling but growing firm. "But my husband and sister-in-law poisoned me, took my unborn child, and nearly killed me out of jealousy and ambition. I stand here today not to speak of pain, but to say we can turn tragedy into strength." As she recounted switching the tea, recording the evidence, and facing her betrayers in court, the room fell silent, then erupted in thunderous applause. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but a smile broke through, not from pride, but from knowing she'd inspired others to rise from their own darkness. A surprise came weeks later when Lucas's mother's lawyer called. "She left you a letter," he said, his voice warm. Alicia opened the envelope, her hands trembling as she read the handwritten lines. "Alicia, you were my greatest joy. I knew Lucas and Martha were wrong, but you were my true daughter. Use what I've left to live a life you deserve." With the letter was a will, bequeathing everything, the lakeside house, savings, and an investment fund, to Alicia instead of her biological children. She sank into a chair, sobbing, not for the wealth, but for that love, the very thing Martha's jealousy had twisted into murder. The letter was a final gift from a mother she'd never hug again, and it fueled her to do something greater. Alicia used part of the inheritance to found the Phoenix Fund, aiding women escaping domestic abuse and rebuilding their lives. She traveled across Seattle, meeting those like her, betrayed, broken, and helping them find light again. Each smile she brought them healed her own heart a little more. One evening, as she received an email from a major client confirming a 3-year contract renewal, Alicia stood by the lake, gazing at its still surface reflecting the moonlight. She opened the wooden box, scattering Lucas's mother's ashes into the water, whispering, "Thank you for giving me a real family, even if just for a moment." The breeze carried the ashes away, blending them with the lake, and Alicia smiled. For the first time in years, it was a smile free of pain. She turned back, stepping into the lakeside house that was now hers, once a crime scene, now a symbol of rebirth. The local paper ran a brief story about Lucas and Martha's sentencing, but Alicia didn't read it. She focused on her next project proposal, knowing the greatest success wasn't revenge, but living a life they could never touch. The moonlight outside still glowed, a reminder to Alicia that no matter how deep the darkness, she'd find light, with her own hands. Alicia's story offers profound lessons: resilience in the face of adversity, the value of trusting oneself, and the power of forgiveness, not for one's enemies, but for oneself. For the elderly, this message serves as a reminder that even when life delivers wounds from those closest to us, we retain the capacity to rise, to rediscover meaning in living. Alicia refused to let pain define her, instead transforming it into a driving force for success and to uplift others. In life, listen to your intuition, hold fast to integrity, and believe that even in the twilight years, each person can rewrite their story, turning scars into medals of honor. As Alicia released the ashes into the lake, let go of the past to embrace the future, not to forget, but to live more fully, with the peace that age brings. Life never stops testing us, but it's how we respond that truly shapes our worth.